It is officially start-up season, which is, first of all, incredibly exciting, maybe my favorite time of the year. But it means that you need to be nailing your startup drafts to make sure that you are set up for future success. In this video, I'm going to be running you through 4 of my favorite things that you need to be taking into your startups to make sure that you are setting your team up to win in years to come. If you don't get your startup right, you can ruin your team for a good few years. And first of all, that's going to lose you money, but also that is just not going to be fun. So you need to go in with strategies in mind. And I have a few for you, which from my portfolio, I know can guarantee success. I've done a couple of startups myself already this off season, although one of them is very strange. And there's more information on that to come for a new series that I'm going to be doing. But for now, let's get into the first strategy for your Dynasty startups. I've realised you can barely see my mustache with the setup that I currently have with my microphone, but it is there. I did shave in a moustache because a couple of people have asked about that. A couple of my friends have asked about that as well. Anyway, my first thing that I would say is to let the draft come to you. Dependent on the order of where you're going to end up in your startups is going to completely change the strategies that you're going to take in those first few rounds. But the main thing that I would be saying is to let the draft appear in front of you, and that means a couple of things. First of all, you can start to see the way in which other people are building their team. So you can see where there are going to be gaps in the market, where certain positions are being overvalued, and where you need to reach, or where you think you can let other things fall to you. For example, if you are drafting at the back of the first round in a superflex draft and people are just absolutely hammering quarterbacks, that means that there is going to be an opportunity for some undervalued wide receivers to drop all the way down to you. If people are reaching on quarterbacks like Caleb Williams or Drake May, Jordan Love, that kind of second to third tier of dynasty quarterback in round 1, that means that some incredibly exciting wide receivers like even Justin Jefferson or CeeDee Lamb might be about to drop to you towards the back of the first, and you can scoop up that value. The other thing that I would say about letting the draft come to you is when it comes to positional runs. It is always better to be at the start of a positional run than it is to be at the end of it. And that means that at some point around the 4th or 5th round of every single startup draft I've been in Superflex, there will be a sudden scramble to reach on quarterbacks. So that kind of QB2, QB3 run when everyone suddenly goes, oh my God, it's starting to run out. I need to draft, Bryce Young at this spot. I need to take Cam Ward at this spot. I need to take Michael Penix. And the value of them compared to some of the other positional players that you can get at that stage is just not there, in my opinion. So it's much better to be the person to start that run and then force some of the other positions to you a little bit later than it is to be at the end of that run and you're scrambling for a QB2 when actually all of the assets you were really interested in have gone and you're ending up with, Justin Fields or JJ McCarthy or one of the older veterans like Matthew Stafford or Geno Smith that you really didn't want to take in the 4th or 5th round. You wouldn't take them directly over one of the wide receivers available, but you just feel like you have to. And that's going to reflect on another point that we're going to come back to later in this episode. But letting the draft come to you is so important because it means that you're going to be there to scoop up value. When we look at the teams that are best at drafting in the NFL, like the Eagles and the Ravens, a lot of the time we sit there and go, how on earth did this player make it to them? And it's because they stood still and they let the draft come to them and they let other people reach on players ahead of them and then they just scooped up that value. So when a player is starting to slip, suddenly you can get some absolutely insane values by just standing still and watching your opposition overthink things. The next thing that I would say is picking a strategy and sticking to it. This is one of the most important things about Dynasty startup drafts, and it's one of the things that I see people get wrong more often than not. There are so many different ways to build a Dynasty team. You can go for an all-in contending roster with veterans that you think are going to help you win immediately. You can build a Dynasty team like a redraft team, go for some assets like, Derek Henry, Matthew Stafford as a win now asset that you see in the video in front of you. You can go for some older wide receivers like a Mike Evans type, and you can go, I'm going to go all in to win this season. And you can do that in the startup if you want. You could also go for a productive struggle where you aim to build around wide receivers or younger assets that are going to have more longevity in the NFL, and then sort of build your team together, but aim to be able to, be on the fringes of playoffs if things fall right. Or you can go almost all out, might be the way to describe it, and you go, I'm going to go for youth, I'm going to punt the startup, I'm going to get as many assets as possible, I'm going to continue to trade back, I'm going to pick up future firsts and future seconds, and I'm going to build an absolutely loaded team for the future, for years to come. So I'm going to be taking chances on players that I think are going to break out. I'm going to take chances on undervalued players that I think are going to be elite assets in years to come. There are so many different strategies, but the thing that I would say, I'm not going to say in this video, going all in with a rebuild, with a complete redraft team is the best way to go, or you need to get 2 quarterbacks by round 3. There are so many different strategies and all of them have their merits. But what I would say is, once you've started to build your team across the first few rounds and you know what your strategy is going to be, or even pre-draft, if you go, hey, I've never built a really young team. I've never built a team where I've had, entirely wide receivers through the first few rounds, and then I've tried to build in some of the veteran running backs later on. So you go, I'm going to try and do that this time. Once you have that strategy, you need to commit to it. And sometimes that means taking players in different ways. But if you get, that far into a draft and you're sitting around the 7th or 8th round and you have the choice between Ricky Pearsall or Cooper Kupp as your wide receiver 3, then you need to then be committing and going with Pearsall and going, well, I have a firm strategy in place and I'm going to stick to it. You don't want a mix of assets across your portfolio, across your team, that are going to have completely different windows to contend, because all that's going to happen is you're going to end up flipping them in season because they're just not going to match up with what you have. The best thing you can do is be firm on the strategy that you want your dynasty startup to take place in, and then just commit to that the entire way. If you are enjoying this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Just 10% of my viewers are subscribed to the channel, and there are so many fun videos coming to you over this summer. I hinted at the start, but I have such a fun series coming to you in the next couple of weeks. I am so excited to share. That's going to be the majority of my work this summer, and I want you to be subscribed so that you can check it out, because I just know you're going to love it. One of the other things that I would say is really important in startup drafts is to remember that you are not trying to fill a lineup. And to be honest, this is actually relatively important in any draft that you're doing, redraft, dynasty, charity leagues, best ball, whatever. You don't need to be looking at gaps in your lineup immediately, but this is particularly the case in dynasty. Dynasty rosters are incredibly movable, and you should never really see them as fixed in place. You can have certain assets that you're going, Justin Jefferson is going to be a cornerstone of my team forever. But the lineup that you come out of your startup draft with is probably not going to be the lineup that you go into the season with, especially if you're in an active league where you know you're going to be able to make trades immediately. But so often in startup drafts, I see this with league mates where they get towards, the 8th, 9th round and they go, I've not got a running back too. I need a running back too. And so they end up reaching on someone that actually the value really isn't there. You are trying to build a roster of the best possible assets and of the assets who are worth the most. And if that means that you are going to continue to build on wide receivers because that's where you think the value is, that should be the way that you proceed. The best way to do this is with each pick to go, would I trade X player for Y player? So if you're sat on the clock and you go, I quite like Javonte Williams at the Cowboys right now, but there's also another asset that I really like, say a Jalen McMillan available in the same spot as a young wide receiver. Would I trade Jalen McMillan for Javonte Williams? Potentially I would. Yeah, I probably would. So I'll go with Williams on that side. But if there's another asset that you compare and you go, there's no way I'm doing that. So say Kyle Williams instead. I prefer Kyle Williams to Javonte Williams. Well, then I'm going to draft him. Treat each individual pick like it's a trade offer, and it'll be much easier to try and figure out how you actually value those players and where you should be going. You should always be drafting for talent and then trading for need. So don't try and immediately fill your starting lineup just because you feel a pressure when you look at your sleeper team and you see that there is a gap. This is the flip half of the flip side of the coin of what I just said about drafting for talent and trading for need. And this can also be trading for talent as well, trading for value. So It's never too early to trade. Some of the best startup drafts that I see are the most active ones, and it's where people are constantly moving over the board, hoovering up value. But, a few years ago, the meta was really to trade back in startup drafts and try and accumulate as many top 100 picks as you could. I still think this is a good strategy, but the reason I've included T. Higgins on the screenshot here is because a couple of years ago, I was in a startup draft where I took T. Higgins in the third round, and someone messaged into the league chat and went, I've been sniped there. I was really excited to get Higgins. Just because you've just drafted a player doesn't mean you can't immediately trade them. Like, if someone posts in the league group chat, I really wanted T. Higgins, I was really hoping he'd fall for me there, message them and say, you can still have T. Higgins. Like, just because I've drafted him doesn't mean that you can't have T. Higgins. And I ended up getting, I think it was for a third round pick for T. Higgins, a sixth round pick, and a first the next year, which actually ended up vastly outweighing T. Higgins. I was incredibly happy with that. But when people show their hand and they show you that there's a player that they're really interested in, you should be leveraging that. So it doesn't matter whether you're at the top of the first round or whether it's a player you've already drafted or whether the draft hasn't even started yet. Trading is one of the best parts of Dynasty Fantasy Football, and it is a great way to start leveraging assets. And like I say, just because you have drafted a player doesn't mean that you can't immediately trade them. So I think it's a really interesting strategy to know that, like, it's never too early to trade. You should be looking to trade as much as possible so long as the value is there. And trading, the window tends to close immediately after the startup because people will look and go, well, why would I make that trade? Because I just drafted this player. So doing it during the startup, especially when people are showing their hand and they're telling you they wanted someone, is such a smart move to make.